if you're watching this, I'm dead. I'm sorry, And honestly, I've envisioned this day coming for as long as 10 years. And I never thought it would come, but here it is. Just every night, I just feel more and more stressed, more and more bored, more and more claustrophobic by being in this world. I had to get out. I had to. I couldn't be here anymore. Couldn't stay here. It's like the weight of the world was just crushing me. I felt trapped. Like I couldn't be who I was, and I had to be dead in order to do it. And all this, and I wrote stuff like, just bitching about the high school kids, do you ever shut the fuck up on your social media? No one gives a rat's ass what you're doing every 5 goddamn minutes of your worthless, depressing, slutty life, all that shit. Stuff like, oh, I'm gonna show up at your house at midnight, tie you to a chair, incapacitate your fucking parents, slit your wrists across the alley, pierce your eyeballs with fucking sewing pins, watch the blood drain ounce by ounce out of your toxic, attention-whoring veins. I went brutally in depth with the stuff. I wrote all this dark, brutal, morbid, grim stuff into my videos, and people ate it up, and they loved it. They didn't realize that I actually meant it all. People pissed me off. I hate humans. I've always hated the human race. And then especially when we have large gatherings like this, it pisses me off. I hate people.
I want to kill everybody.
They say it's not the monsters under the bed you should be scared of, but the ones hiding in plain sight. The ones that walk past you on the street or stand next to you in line, or even the worker that just served you. The truth is, most monsters don't look any different to you or I, and that is what scares me. In the case of Randy Stair, we have a lot to analyse because the aspiring YouTuber had a pretty large social media presence. It's a truly upsetting case, and Randy had left clues all over, some covert and others blatant. Some say as a cry for help, others say as a product of his narcissism and mental health. Before that fateful night on June the 7th, 2017, when Randy, armed with a shotgun, massacred 3 of his co-workers in cold blood during a night shift at a local supermarket he worked at, before turning the gun on himself, ending his own life. Humans have tried to understand the relationship between suicide and murder for a long time. It's been postulated there is an inextricable link between the two, but is that really the case? To try to better understand today's subject, we're going to take a little tour back in time. That's right, I'm sneaking a little history into here. The relationship between homicide and suicide as a process of killing has been studied extensively. Correlative research on homicide and suicide rates dates back to at least the early 1700s. André Michel Guéret, regarded as one of the 2 founders of moral statistics, which led to the development of criminology, sociology, and ultimately modern social science. He approached the act of killing oneself and the crime of killing another as comparable phenomena. Several other scholars extended geography as a determinant for understanding the relationship between homicide and suicide to other European countries. Then, in the 19th century, scholars approached the topic through the lens of culture and society, in an effort to further the understanding we have on murder and suicide. Tissot, in a paper from 1840, perceived suicide as a direct response to large societal issues of the time and provided little differentiation between the acts of homicide and suicide. Furthermore, he says suicide and homicide share a common etiology such as normal behaviour, death and method. Towards the end of the 19th century, sociologists and social theorists furthered the understanding on societal forces, precipitated in part by the work of Emil Durkheim. While Durkheim's work focused primarily on suicide, his ideas and methods also had an effect on studies of homicide. Durkheim considered suicide to be a social fact and thus describable in terms of social factors. Durkheim thought suicide would be more common where social integration was weak. Understanding of suicide as a proportionality of one's social integration was further championed and expanded to include the topic of homicide by Henry and Shaw in the 50s. More on that shortly. Randy Stair, best known by his followers of his YouTube channel as Andrew Blaze, was a seemingly smart and ambitious young lad who had dreams of becoming popular on YouTube for his animation videos and comedy-type skits, mirroring much of the 2010 style content on the platform at the time. He wrote in his journal and filmed home videos of himself planning the massacre and discussing his thoughts, which were all uploaded to his now deleted Mediafire page on YouTube. This gives us a valuable but chilling insight into the mind of someone who is truly fallen into the abyss. Starting from his middle school years, evidence of Randy's deteriorating mental state began to emerge. He explains in written stories he had presented to his English teacher, the main characters would almost always end up being involved in some deadly incident that would kill said characters. Randy claims that his works were never questioned by instructors. It was around this time that Randy's fascination with death and the afterlife became an obsession, but it apparently wasn't a worthy cause for anyone around him, which he expressed a lot of resentment for.
I must have wrote like 4 or 5 stories where the character got killed at the end, and I actually turned these in as assignments, and I never got like any like weird looks from the teacher or anything. She was a nice teacher and everything, really great. Yeah, the teacher never like felt concerned or anything. I just remember not getting any feedback in terms of that, so I don't know what she was thinking, but...
Randy reports that his suicidal ideation intensified by the time he started high school. He began pondering methods of suicide, including asphyxiation and burning. On a trip to New York with his family, Randy said that he contemplated jumping from a skyscraper to his death and later regretted the choice to stay alive. By the time he had finished high school, his hatred for the world and humans was seeping into every aspect of his life, but he was strongly opposed to therapy, saying it changes who you are. I would also dare to say medication would be off the cards too then, things that if used correctly can be a huge help. The isolation grew as he transitioned into adulthood, going on to work a night shift at a supermarket, which would have made socialising even more difficult. It's thought that his father worked at the store in a managerial role and actually got him the job, but this did nothing to earn his dad any respect in Randy's eyes. Rather than real people, Randy found comfort and solace in the cartoon Danny Phantom. He really liked one particular character that he expressed admiration for, but to a disturbing level. Of course, there is nothing wrong with getting lost in fantasy or being passionate about a certain media, but when it compromises your ability to distinguish reality from fiction, there is a clear line being crossed. And this was the case for Randy. Sadly, the character Amber McLean, according to Randy, was the one who told him to commit the heinous crime. Going off of the understanding, he would be rebirthed into their universe and become a ghost girl too, like his favourite character.
Like if you look on the poster behind me, those were inspired by Amber McLean, which is a ghost from a TV show called Danny Phantom, which started back in 2003, 2004. You know, I was in late elementary school at that time. But this ghost, this woman always connected with me. But ever since I first saw her, something changed. And it wasn't like I grew up or anything like that. Like I realized, oh my gosh, I'm attracted to girls and all this. No, it just, something changed. It was like a spark. And it just connected with me, it made me feel warm inside, and it felt very familiar, which was strange. It was like I'd seen her before. It's all thanks to that character, that Ember character. I just felt a connection to her. I felt like I've known her before, even though she's a cartoon. spiritually, I just felt connected. It's like she just like grabbed me and roped me in. I can't even explain it. And the character's backstory was she died in a house fire, and she made this song called Remember. And it's a song that basically sums up her death. And I couldn't stop playing it. It like hypnotized me. And that's the irony of it all, is this ghost hypnotizes you with her music. And it changed me. I can't even explain it. It hooked me. Reeled me in. And she was always there when I got into this dark, depressing place. And I just connected with her unlike anything I ever have in my life. And that's when I started thinking about killing myself by burning myself, that was it. From that point forward, she never left my life again. Ever. I played the song pretty much every single day of my life. And just fell down a hole of deep, dark depression and despair and nothingness into an abyss of just fucking darkness. I can't even explain it. And every day it just got that little bit darker. From that point forward until the day I died. Till the night I died.
He has made remarks pointing towards schizophrenic experiences of hearing Amber's voice, but Dr. Grande postulates that this would most likely be a form of maladaptive daydreaming as opposed to hearing voices, as this was something he wanted to happen, rather than it being involuntary. Interestingly enough, aside from the post-mortem saying he was suffering from gender dysphoria, he had never been diagnosed formally with any form of mental health issues. This likely compounded his feelings of isolation and lack of understanding. Although Randy reportedly endured bullying in his youth, it was, from what can be gathered, not the defining factor behind his actions. Journal entries dated from November 23, 2016 through to June 5, 2017 contained disturbing revelations about his character. In these entries, Randy expressed admiration for the perpetrators of the Columbine school shooting, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold. The contents of his journal even reflect those of Eric Harris, the elder of the two Columbine shooters. The first line of Randy's entry pays homage to Harris with the quote, "I hate the fucking world," a line from the school shooter's journal. Randy's revelations, however, were not limited to his journal. He dedicated an animated video to the shooting titled The Westboro High School Massacre, which depicts a school shooting similar to that of Columbine. His usage of shotguns and propane tanks, along with 3 purchased Natural Selection t-shirts, also solidifies an inspiration derived from the shooters. Deviating from Durkheim's arguments, Henry and Short thought homicide and suicide causally related, combining Durkheim's theories on suicide and social integration and Freud's theories on intrapsychic aggression. Henry and Short regarded homicide and suicide as forms of aggression predicated on measures of social integration. According to Henry and Short, aggression is a measure of the level of societal restraint over an individual's actions. In conjunction with statistical data on the subjects, the idea that homicide and suicide can be explained analogously in terms of aggression furthers the argument that the two are mutually associated. A similar position is expressed by Hentig, saying, "Murder and suicide are complementary phenomena. The total amount of available destructiveness is discharged into psychologically similar, socially distinct gestalten or shapes." The understanding that both homicide and suicide are antithetical to cultural norms and that each involves some element of self-destruction with regard to both the killer and the individual killed, there is some evidence that many homicides are victim precipitated and represent suicides, and has somehow provided the stimulus to show that homicide and suicide are not unrelated and that one should consider them in aggregate as a summation of deaths. In The Currents of Lethal Violence, Unnithan and others revitalised the ideas of Henry and Short by arguing in favour of the stream analogy or integrated model in a paper from the 90s called The Currents of Lethal Violence, an integrated model of suicide and homicide, saying that homicide and suicide are alternate and causal forms of violent death and depends on the forces of production like cultural and societal factors that indicate the amount of lethal violence and direction, such as the cultural and societal factors driving the forms of violence. Both Wu and Batten, in looking at regional rates of homicide and suicide in the US and in studying historical rates of death in the US, provide moderate support for the stream analogy theory and the notion that homicide and suicide may share common social causes. All this to say, the relationship is very complicated, but there is perceived to be some, as evidenced over the best part of a century. Some risk factors for murder-suicide are based on the relationship between perpetrator and victim, history of domestic violence, the sex of perpetrator and victim, the age, presence of divorce or separation, use of weapon, and history of mental illness. In a separate paper, it shows that the incidence of murder-suicide is low, stable, and similar to what has been reported in the past. There are, however, some distinct risk factors for murder-suicide, including substance abuse, which is not as common, mostly male perpetrators with depression, which is more common, and older male caregivers that are at risk. Some experts consider the homicides to be simply a side effect of the suicide, wherein the specific decision to kill oneself precipitates a perceived necessity to kill others. Other experts say that murder-suicide cannot be categorised with either homicides or suicides, but is actually a distinct behaviour. With this information in mind, let's go back to Randy and the shooting. Randy's home life was good in the sense that he had two parents that are seemingly together and still married, a nice house with what looks to be a small woodland in the backyard, and he was still living at home at 27. He expresses a great deal of hate towards his father. It's unclear what might be the issue, other than his dad seems to want him to get a job and start his own life by moving out and stuff. The things you'd expect from a parent, but Randy didn't seem to appreciate this. His relationship with his mum seemed to be much better, but by all accounts he couldn't talk to either of them about the many complex feelings he would have been likely struggling with. As mentioned earlier, he was unofficially suffering from gender dysphoria according to the coroner's report. Randy did confirm that he cross-dressed, and it was confirmed also that he was found to be wearing women's clothes under his actual clothes, as well as having his makeup on at the time of the crime. Randy was transgender, although he didn't transition or identify as a lady, due to what come across as a deep-seated condemnation for anyone who identifies as LGBTQIA+, and also the more understandable fear of just general judgment. It's unclear why, but he regularly used homophobic slurs as well as racism and other forms of offensive rhetoric towards anyone who identified as LGBTQIA+. In a study by DJ Allen and T. Olson, they investigated for the first time the relationship between internalised homophobia and shame in gay men, and also briefly re-examined the relationship between internalised homophobia and self-esteem in gay men. Their state findings include a significant and positive relationship between shame and internalised homophobia, and a significant inverse relationship between internalised homophobia and self-esteem. The homophobia could very well have been contributing to his low emotions, serving as self-deprecation. He didn't seem to have any friends at all, and it's alleged that he never managed to find a romantic partner. From what I can gather, he put a lot of time into his YouTube endeavours and acted like that was all he cared about. He made out like he didn't care about socialising, but I personally think that that is not true. In late 2016, Randy began working on what would be his final video, called Westboro High Massacre / Goodbye. It featured Randy and another EGS character, Rachel, shooting up a high school. His animations show two things to me. The first thing is that you can tell he has a certain passion for what he's doing, and the second thing is just how far he had delved into madness. Completely consumed with his upcoming plan, in the run-up to the crime he meticulously set everything up. He had been contemplating his demise for years at this point, and it was now just a question of how. Because the end point was always going to be suicide, but whether or not he would actually hurt people in the process would ultimately come down to a coin flip.
Got a 1983 quarter right here. You believe in fate? Here's the fate test. I'm gonna flip this 3 times, or the best out of 3 rather, and if it's heads, I'll do it here. If it's tails, supermarket. Best of 3. Here we go. I'm not gonna touch it. You will see it as I see it. If I can find it. There it is. That's a tails. See that? 2. Looking at it. New land use of here. Heads. Had to be, huh? Have to have it come down to the very last coin flip. Okay. This is it. For all the marbles. Except we're playing for like much more than marbles here. I can't believe I'm having this come down to a coin flip. The flip of a coin. Here it goes. 1, 2, 3. It's gonna land behind the camera. Just to the side. I can't see it. I see it in the grass, but I can't see it. Tails. That is a tails, folks. Tails. Which means there's going to be a loss of a human life, besides my own. Possibly more than one. That's fate for you.
So, while drowning in sorrow and overwhelmed with depression, the plan was set. It was not going to be peaceful and was going to happen at the supermarket. He opted to do it while he worked at his usual night shift, so the store was closed at the time of shooting, although that didn't do much to help the other workers that were present at the night shift. At approximately 11 PM on the 7th of June 2017, after securing all the store's exits, including locking the automatic doors located at the entrance, Randy equipped himself with 2 pistol-gripped automatic shotguns and prowled the store.
New details about a murder-suicide at a supermarket in northeastern Pennsylvania. Police say the gunman was an employee who killed 3 co-workers before he killed himself. State police are now looking at Randy Stair's digital footprint. It turns out YouTube videos of Stair preparing for the attack have been found. Police also say there are journal entries that showed his planned attack, or he planned the attack, for several months.
You wish you could have talked to him, you know what I mean? You wish you could have been there for him and stopped it before things like this happen.
I have tears in my eyes, but I'm trying to hold it back, you know, but it's just really sad.
Investigators say Stair spent the first 90 minutes of his shift blocking entrances and exits so no one could get out once the shooting started.
Of the 5 total employees working in the store that night, Kristen Newall was the only survivor. Kristen, who had been distracted and listening to music while the events unfolded, was approached by Randy. He remained behind Kristen for approximately 5 seconds before she, still unaware of the situation, turned to walk down another aisle. Princeton became aware of the attack when Randy began shooting at store merchandise, including a glass object, and immediately fled to the crew room where she contacted the police. The shooting concluded when Randy took his own life via a self-inflicted gunshot near the deli section. Investigators later discovered that despite arming himself with 2 weapons, all rounds were fired from only one of his shotguns. It's unclear why he chose not to shoot Kristen, but I can only imagine how traumatic that must be. There are various accounts of what happened, and some sources say they made eye contact, but others say he stood behind her for a few seconds before walking away. Either way, it's a truly horrific attack that left 3 people dead, as well as Randy. Born out of his contempt for the human race, harboured in his loneliness and unleashed with a veracity comparable to acts seen in war, there are no winners here. I think one thing is evident from researching this story. It's that you just never know what somebody else might be going through. Everyone was so shocked when this happened, with people who knew Randy all agreeing on one thing: they did not see it coming. After everything we've heard today, you might be wondering how. Why did nobody see the many warning signs that he exhibited? I think the answer is a simple one. People who knew him just could never imagine him doing it, so the idea never crossed their mind, even when he was literally buying shotguns. It's a grim reminder that the nice comment you make to the quiet kid might go a long way, and we truly don't know what somebody else is going through. Rest in peace to the 3 victims in this case. It's truly despicable the way that they was taken from the world by somebody who was ultimately unwell and needed help. I do, however, have very little sympathy for Randy. Personally, anyone who does such a thing can go fuck themselves, and they give up the right to sympathy when they choose to enact on such an objectively abhorrent action. He knew exactly what he was doing, so no, I definitely don't feel sorry for him. I feel incredibly sorry for the 3 victims in this case, who again was taken far too soon. I do also want to add that just because somebody is feeling like they don't want to be here anymore, it doesn't make them automatically a murderer. Research shows the 2 are linked in many ways, like a disregard for human life, and share many of the same outcomes, like loss of human life, but that's not saying that the 2 are mutually exclusive or something, and correlation does not equal causation. Many people have struggled with this kind of stuff and never hurt anybody. I just wanted to make sure I added that bit. And look, honestly, I've been there myself. If anybody is struggling with any of the issues that we've spoke about today, reach out, please. It's not too late, and there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Just reach out to someone, anyone. Talk to your doctor, mention it to a parent, tell a friend. It's not too late. I heard that suicide doesn't stop the pain, it passes it on to someone else, and although it might be cliche and overused now, I think it is incredibly poignant. Stay strong, reach out, people care, I care, goddammit, and I am people. But okay, to wrap this up, I want to leave you with one thing. Life can only be understood backwards, but to live, you must keep going forward. It doesn't even matter how many years you live, really what matters is the quality of those years. My happiness is not your happiness, and nobody gets to tell you what your happiness is. But keep moving forward, there is a brighter day if you can make it through the night. Thank you for watching.